Welcome to the Commonwealth, where we feature the unique people changing our world. Today's guest is Megan Elliott. Megan is the founding director of the Johnny Carson School of Emerging Media Arts, which has received global attention for preparing students for the future through a combination of art and technology. Before this position, Megan has both started and worked for companies around the world. Megan, thank you so much for joining us
today. It's a great honor to be here. Thank you.
Yes, yeah. So to start with, as I was doing research on the Johnny Carson Center, the messaging within the center was preparing and equipping students for the future. So to start with, I wanted, I guess, to get your perspective on what those students should be preparing for. That if you were an 18-year-old going to college, what would be the things you would focus on?
When we were creating this program, we did a lot of research, and I was very influenced by one book in particular by David Owen called Robot Proof: Higher Education in the Age of Machine Intelligence, because that's the students of today will be working alongside machines. So for us to thrive in an age of machine intelligence, we really need to develop 4 new cognitive capacities. And those is systems thinking, critical thinking, cultural agility and entrepreneurship. And so as we developed the program here at the Carson Center, we mapped those 4 new cognitive capacities to systems thinking, to code, computational media, design to critical thinking, entrepreneurship and cultural agility to storytelling. And I firmly believe that if you have facility in each of those 4 cognitive capacities, you will thrive.
So you mentioned working alongside a machine, and there's been a bunch of talk about AI taking over the world, if you will, and some of it seems sort of fear-mongering, and then there's also like a reality component to that. So in the future, you're talking about what won't a machine be able to do, like how will the students work along with a machine, and how will they I guess help one another out?
Sure. I think I was actually speaking with 2 creative directors from Unity 3D games engine just last Friday morning, and we talked about how a holy grail for the creative industries is to mechanize or automate that kind of repetitive work, so that you can free up your labor, free up your mind to do things that are much more creative and interesting. So, for example, within a game engine, which is what we use a lot now, we use it to create virtual worlds, we use it to create games, we're increasingly using it for entertainment purposes and cinema, is that you can now automate, for example, a character walking or running or moving. And so a human being doesn't need to do that anymore. Right? A human being can create the algorithm that will then make the figure move or dance. So I think that's where it will help us, where we're actually using AI to do the things we don't want to do, so that we can do things that are much more interesting.
Speaking on the education system very broadly, I know the Johnny Carson Center is doing some very unique and remarkable things in this, I guess, cosm of the university. But how do you think our education system broadly is equipping students for that future?
That's a very large question,
yes,
Nick.
Yeah.
And it's, I think each place is different. I think and if you're talking internationally, it's different again as well. I think what's happening in America, which will change, we can view the COVID-19 as an accelerant, right? And I had been, people that I listen to and pay attention to were talking about it accelerating us 10 years from where we are today, right? So that when we so that everything that's happening now, it's not disruption. It would have happened anyway. It's just happening at a faster pace. So I think what we're seeing in terms of higher education is we have a debt crisis for students, and I think that needs to be dismantled. We need to find new ways for students to be educated, and I find it criminal that young people come out of university in debt. I come from a country where you come out with some debt, but that debt you pay back to the government. It's not to private companies. There's no compound interest on it, and you pay it when you can afford to. And if you can't afford to pay it for a while, then you don't pay it. So I think that we have to really examine that system, because right now we are disadvantaging our young people. And I think also that debt means that young people themselves are re-examining what does higher education mean, particularly at a graduate level. You know, do I really want to be at school for 6 or 7 years? Does it help me to be a specialist, or should I be a generalist? So they're big, meaty questions, ones that I like to engage with on the periphery and to read about. But I'm not an academic or an expert in that area at all. Okay. But that is, I think that as a society, that's something that the US has to grapple with. How are we preparing people for innovation and to be innovators and to be creative and to solve problems like climate change when we saddle them with hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt in their mid-20s? Yeah. I don't think we're going to be able to do it.
Yeah, it makes it a lot more difficult, and it also changes the decisions you're going to make after
exactly,
having a degree.
Exactly. I was fortunate enough not to have a student debt because, because of where I was educated in Australia. And that meant that I could make a decision to leave a very well-paying job as a leader of industry, as the executive director of the Australian Writers Guild, and start a company with Brendan Harkin in Singapore, out of a suitcase in a hotel room with no backing, and then to take that business to 14 countries and 22 cities throughout the world. If I was saddled with $200,000 of debt from my studies, I couldn't have made that decision. I couldn't have brought China to the Sydney Opera House or taken Australian Aboriginal people to Shanghai. You know, so I think, yeah, absolutely.
Yes, yeah. What do you think the consequence is of not preparing our students, especially American students? What's the consequence of not putting them in the place to succeid?
Well, the consequence is that they won't succeed. I mean, you know, the consequence is hunger or homelessness. I think that we also want to, you know, one of those 4 cognitive capacities I mentioned is cultural agility and storytelling. That means able to work across and between cultures and to move beyond perhaps, which is a broken model of American exceptionalism, and to actually talk about partnering with other countries as opposed to being in competition with them. I spent 5 years in China, and the first thing that a Chinese business person will ask you is, how can we collaborate? How can we cooperate together? And you spend years on that problem. And then after you've established a mutual trust, then you can start to do business together or cooperate together. And so I think being able to experience empathy and understand the cultural mores of other countries will mean that we're more successful because we can collaborate together.
Yes, yeah. How are you instilling that in your students?
Well, all of our work here is, a lot of the work here is team-based work and project-based learning. So students are collaborating in teams from the get-go to learn about that, people they may never have met before from other parts of the country. We haven't yet had any international students. However, I'm a foreigner, and we actually also hired a professor whose home country is Korea. Wow. So, and actually, most of our professors are not from Lincoln, Nebraska. So, you know, they're experiencing perhaps other ways of thinking and being through participating at the university. We also, even prior to COVID, we would Zoom people in from around the world. I've put together an international advisory council. So those are industry professionals in China, India, Hollywood, the UK, Australia. So that's another way where students can get international perspectives.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. You were hired for this in 2016, correct?
Yeah. I moved here in 2017.
Okay, yeah. So when you were brought onto the faculty at UNL, how thought through was this program, or was it mainly just like an endowed idea? Or
people had been working on this for a very long time before I got here to work both with the Johnny Carson Foundation and with the Johnny Carson School of Theatre and Film and the Hicks and Lead College of Fine and Performing Arts and our Office of Research and Economic Development. However, there was no Bachelor of Fine Arts in Emerging Media Arts. That's something that is all that. This building wasn't here either, actually. We had to design the building, design the program, recruit faculty and recruit students. So, and we're continuing to do that. We're continuing to build the plane as we're flying it. You might see that we're still in construction as we made a very controversial choice not to build any offices for faculty here because we didn't know who we were going to hire. And so now we realise we don't need offices. What we need are labs and studios to support their research.
Yes, yeah. So when you were, I guess, thinking through how this would, when you were designing the building and the curriculum and the faculty, how did you know you were how did you know you were headed in the right direction when this was a unique program to Nebraska?
Well, first of all, it wasn't just me. It was a community of people, faculty, and as well as people on the advisory council. We did a lot of research. I mean, a lot of research had already been done, but we did a lot of research about, what's happening in industries, what's happening in games or cinema or artificial intelligence or the blockchain, for example. And what do our students need to know and need to learn? What kind of industries could we anticipate our students would go in? I mean, to me, it's very important that we set our students up to be successful here in Nebraska. I wasn't interested in using taxpayers' money to create a program which just drained talent from the state. So, a lot of research, a lot of talking. We held an event here very early on called the First Carson's Conversations, where I brought in experts. We did a half-day conference, and then we spent a day and a half locked in a room together kind of brainstorming and putting bones on the curriculum. And we really did treat it like a startup. Like I even had curriculum sprints where we locked ourselves in rooms to work on it. And we're about to change it again. So we've always treated it like if the Carson Center is a startup, then the BFA in Emerging Media Arts is one of my products. I'll have many other products. Ultimately, I hope to have a product which is a graduate program and a conference and publishing. But that's how a lot of research and hard work and dreaming, I think.
Yes, of course. Throughout that process, was there ever any pushback to this innovative program?
Completely.
Yes.
Completely. Everybody thinks change sounds fabulous, and won't it be nice when it's changed? But could we just hold off until after I retire? That's the way of the world, right? My husband said to me that, if they're not trying to kill you, you're not doing anything important. Mm-hmm. Of course there's pushback. Change is uncomfortable, and when we're uncomfortable, we can be fearful because it's unknown. And so it takes a lot of resilience and a lot of team building. And I also, had to, eat humble pie at times and learn to listen much more to experience of people because changing is, it's not just us that is changing, it's the industry itself. I mean, it's hard. When Reed Hastings was building Netflix, I always think about this. When it was a very successful, DVD shipping business, he actually put the team together to build the streaming business and physically removed them from that site. I think he even put them in another country, but he put them separate because he didn't want them dragged back into the comfortable, warm waters of, this business is fine as it is. We're doing great with our DVD shipping business. So I think that's hard. It takes a lot of strength and resilience on behalf of leadership, and we have that at this university, to hold open space for change to happen. So to hold back, the inertia of everything's okay, we'll just keep doing it how we've always done it. That takes a lot of strength from leaders.
Yes, yeah. And even you yourself as the leader of this, when you would receive the pushback, how would you know what to take with a grain of salt or what to invalidate entirely? What does that feedback look like as the leader of this change?
You have to walk the talk, and so it means careful listening and saying yes and. So some of the research that we did was about a program at Carnegie Mellon University at the Entertainment Technology Center, where graduates are hired. Everyone is hired before they're done. It's amazing, and they say that their secret sauce is that they teach everyone improv theatre, because improv theatre. It's based on yes and. you always have to make your partner look good, and you always have to serve the story, so something that is greater than you, right? So these are great body muscle memories to have. And the same with Johnny Carson, who actually was a magician. And magicians are only as good as the stories they tell, and they know how to direct the gaze, and they're always looking for the aha moment. So there are the 3 great body memories for any entrepreneur to have. So we're teaching our students improv theatre and magic tricks, how to be magicians. So, leads me back to, when there is pushback or when there is conflict, I have to say yes and I have to listen and validate those very, often very deeply held beliefs that may be very true, or that just may not be true right now, or may not be the right fit for the program. And I think that's the other thing too, is to develop your strategy early on, which is what we did, so that then you knew what you could say no to, right? Mm-hmm. So that was important for us too, so that I could forge ahead and stay on the path and not be distracted by shiny new things, because we can all be distracted by shiny new things. But if it's not in service to the mission of the program or to the mission of the company, then you just have to say, that's nice, but no.
Interesting. I was intrigued by what you said earlier about the program not being a talent drain for the state, that the goal is to teach students that then stay in Nebraska.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How does that work? Because in parallel of that, a lot of the industries that I guess use the talent taught at the Carson Center, like video game design or cinema, a lot of the companies in Nebraska are not like in those industries.
Yeah.
So how do you, I guess, weigh both of those things of like having the students stay in Nebraska, but a lot of the industries that they study are not located
Sure.
here?
Well, first of all, I believe that media is an industry-building industry. So emerging media arts or emerging media technologies are part of every industry. Who doesn't have a YouTube channel, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think that that it's necessary just about entertainment, and that's what actually really attracted me to the role in the first place, is that you could bring emerging media arts, you could bring speculative design, you could bring augmented reality to the agricultural industries, to insurance and banking industries, which we have a lot of here. The one thing that every industry has right now and will never run out of is data. So data visualization, those kinds of things can be applied to any industry. So, and then I think since 2004, I've only ever needed an internet connection. And I think that's the other accelerant, isn't it, that we've seen with COVID-19, is that things can be done remotely, right? Nobody's driving across town in LA right now, right? People are editing from home. Yeah. People are teaching cinema using game engines. People are doing their animatics at home. So that's possible. You don't have to be in LA. And actually what everyone in LA is talking about right now is the brain drain from LA. The state's on fire. It's really expensive to live there. So people are leaving. They're going to Atlanta, they're going to Nashville, they're going to Austin. They're getting out of California. And people can work remotely.
Yes, yeah, of course. And Megan, throughout this interview, you've touched on the different, I guess, your career doing a bunch of different things around the world. That you started X Media Labs with Brendan Harkin in Singapore out of a suitcase. So what? I guess starting with that, what was X Media Labs, and what was that? I guess career as an entrepreneur.
Well, Brendan Harkin started it, and then I joined pretty quickly, and it was all about the nexus of digital media and creative people. And when we started, there wasn't a lot of internet penetration in a place like Australia. Well, there was, but there wasn't a lot of understanding of what the potential of digital media could be. People still had dial-up connections. I don't think you even had SMS messaging in America at that time. YouTube was just starting. And Brendan came from the technology and mobile place. And I was the executive director of the Australian Writers Guild. So I represented all of the writers across film, television, theatre. And so it was a perfect Venn diagram because, we knew that his people, they weren't going to succeed if they didn't have compelling content. And that was something that we more traditional media makers knew how to do. So so that's how we started Cross Media Lab. And it was a network and it was event-based. It was before Y Combinator or In Motion or anything. So it was about where we would have a theme with a government generally, like the Sydney Opera House or with the Chinese government when we were in China or Indonesia, whatever. And I would put out a call for 10 to 15 great project ideas or startup companies. And so hundreds would nominate and I would select those project team ideas or startups that the mentors that we assembled could add the most value to. And what was really unique about it is that it was generally around content as opposed to content and content solutions as opposed to platform development. But so, for example, we were holding Cross Media Lab in Mumbai during the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industries Frames Conference, which is the largest business of entertainment conference in Asia. And so I had the chief games developer or designer from Nokia there, back when Nokia was a thing. And, for example, and so she had to learn about Hanuman, the Monkey King, and cricket, because those were the things that Indian mobile games developers were interested in creating content about. So it was always been important for us to the democratization of access to digital media, but it's a way that we could tell many different stories so that people could see their own stories reflected back at them. And I think that there's been a second acceleration of that is happening right now because of COVID and because of the streaming wars. I think it's very important that a young person in Malaysia can see Malaysian stories on Malaysian television, that they can imagine a future for themselves and not just see, white American or British stories. So that was part of the impetus. And it was exciting because, we held Cross Media Lab in countries like India, Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, China, but also Sweden and Switzerland and London and Australia and New Zealand. So it was, it was very exciting to bring all of those cultures together and to learn from each other.
Yes, of course. So you have been a creator, an entrepreneur, an educator, artist, writer, and a lot of those fields, there are very high highs and very low lows involved with almost all of them. Was there a time when you were, I guess, low or like things were not firing on all cylinders, and someone gave you a piece of advice that it resonated with you and helped you push through to get to the next step of your career?
I don't know. I think something I found challenging very early on and sometimes still do is to listen carefully. I think so often as a younger person, we want people to know that we know stuff, or that we rush in to end sentences, or we want to show that I know a little bit about what you're doing, so that to try and create empathy, and that shuts the other person down. And the biggest thing for me to learn is that if I'm talking, I'm not learning, so I should shut up and listen. And it was hard for me to learn, but I think I did. And I particularly had to learn that in China. And that's another thing too, I think, in terms of becoming a very good, again, this goes back to that cultural agility piece, is to be a good communicator. And people don't realise how poor they are at communicating. And often what we do when we communicate, and I am guilty of this, I'm not as sharp on this as I used to be, and I noticed this the other day, is that we use slang words. We expect everyone to have the same shared history as us so that they automatically know what we're talking about. And when you're speaking across cultures, that's not true. I don't have a shared history of American culture because I didn't grow up here. But I would do that in Asia sometimes. I would just assume that, somebody from China knew what I was talking about when they had no idea, because what I was saying was very culturally specific to my own experience as an Australian. So those things, I think, is to really to remember that when you're talking like I am now, you're not learning, to not assume any prior knowledge, to not make assumptions about shared experiences when you're communicating across cultures.
Yes, yeah. You just touched on traveling and experiencing a bunch of different cultures. That you've been quoted as saying you wanted to travel the world since you were an 11-year-old. Correct.
Yeah.
How did traveling affect your creativity?
Oh, it's incredible. If you're a creative person, you need to, and everyone is a creative person, right? Everyone is creative. Mm-hmm. And you need to feel that well. So you need to feed your creativity. And if you're wondering if you're not creative or if you're interested in being more creative, there's a great book called The Artist's Way by Julie Cameron. I thoroughly suggest you invest in that book. It's great. But so naturally traveling, of course, it's filled me with incredible knowledge and flavors and memories and understandings about history and where the world's going. It's inspiring. So I love it. Actually, COVID has been the longest time I've stayed anywhere without traveling.
Yeah, I also love to travel, and it's one of those complaints where you're like, I'm not going to travel for obvious reasons, but man, I wish I can't wait for everyone to get vaccinated and to hop back on a plane someday.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yes, yeah, and hopefully that's sooner rather than later. So last question for you, Megan. If you were to go back and give that 11-year-old girl a piece of advice, what would you say?
The same thing that I'm saying to our students: dream bigger. I think we learnt this as Australians in China. We didn't think big enough. I could have added another 3 zeros to any check I was asking a Chinese government official to write for me, and they probably wouldn't have batted an eye. But, we had come from a place in Australia where it's like, well, it's only going to cost this much, so that they would say yes to fund things. So I think that's advice.
How do you get yourself to dream bigger?
Yeah, how do you? Back yourself, be resilient, find people who, surround yourself with people who care about you and support you. I think there's a lot of stuff about learning how to, when you hear the negative, if you have a negative internal dialogue about yourself or your capacities, to learn how to silence that or to push through it and to become resilient and to not listen to it. I think there's a lot to be said for people to have counsellors, for example, if they do experience negative internal dialogue, because that can really hold them back from wanting to, dream bigger or achieve their dreams. I think those kinds of things are important, to believe that you can do it. You can. Yes, you just can.
Yes, absolutely. And an inspiring message to leave us with, Megan. So thank you again so much for joining us. And I can already anticipate all of the value bombs you give the listeners. So
you're very kind. Thanks so much, Nick. Cheers.
The Commonwealth is edited by Kyle Kua, directed by Alec McChesney, and produced in partnership with KZUM Radio. Special thanks to Emmy Hernandez and Isabel Cheeseman for creative guidance. That is it for this week's episode. Thank you for being a member of the Commonwealth. If you enjoyed this conversation, please tap the share button and send it out to your friends and family. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please leave us a review. If you want to hear more conversations just like this one, go check out our podcast library. We've been making this show for about a year and have interviewed disruptive leaders from around the world. You can also tap subscribe or follow to stay updated when new episodes drop.